Okay, good evening. We're going to get started now because we're running late. Welcome to the third Dine and Learn of the summer. It's July 22nd, 2019. Thank you to Shalom and Beth Meiri for sponsoring tonight's Dine and Learn. Anyone else who wants to sponsor future weeks, please contact Moshe. I'd like to talk to, so we've been talking about Poland in the 16th and early 17th century, the golden age of Poland, some of the big names that we know throughout history. I'd like to talk tonight about what you do when you're an up-and-coming scholar and the Gadol Hador criticizes you, or other leading rabbis criticize you. How do you handle that? So we have in the Tshuvas of the Rema. Remember, the Rema was appointed, as we've discussed, the rabbi of Krakow at the age of 20. He was a young up-and-comer, genius of the generations, but he was young. The Maharshal, who was 20 years older than him, was the Gadol Hador in Poland at the time, or one of the two, Rabbi Shlomo Shachman and the Maharshal. And the Maharshal, as we saw last week, was very strong-minded. And we don't know exactly how, but we have a few tshuvas, a few exchanges between the Maharshal and the Rema, who were somehow distantly related. And we see here just a great correspondence. And how the Rema finesses the situation is very, very impressive. We don't know the original Shiloh, but the Maharshal was picking on specific items that the Rema said and arguing on them. And when the Maharshal argued, he argued strongly. It's a Ruska D'Oraisa. He was very angry in order to get to the truth of the Torah. So somehow in the original exchange, the Rema says, I don't know what defect you find in my argument. And the word for defect he used is tinra. The Maharshal picked it up. It's just a side comment. He's talking a little poetically. They all talk poetically. They wrote poetically. And he said, well, what tinra do you find in my argument? Tinra, so let's give some background. Tinra is a blister on a lung, in Hilchos Treifus. So if there's a hole in the lung, the animal is not kosher. So how do we know there's a hole on the lung? If you feel a lesion is where the lung tries to heal itself, and you could feel on top, there's a bump on the lung. But a blister is different. A blister just is a growth on top of it. It doesn't imply that there's a hole. So the Gemara says in Chulin, I think Daf Mem Ches Amud Aleph, Amud Beis, says that there are two types of blisters, a kande and tinra, and they're both kosher. So the Rama says, I don't know what blister, what defect you find in me, what tinra. And the Maharshal, and he said, and the Rama says, you act like this tinra is kasha ke'evin, it's hard as a rock. Kasha ke'sela, hard as a rock. So the Maharshal says, well, you know what? Actually, a tinra is not hard as a rock. The Rama was just saying, I don't know what you find is so hard. And the Maharshal says, hold on a minute, I don't like your analogy. Because a tinra is not as hard as a rock. Because a tinra is a blister, and a blister grows hard around the liquid, the pus, or whatever it is inside. So it might feel hard, but it's actually liquid inside. So I wouldn't compare that to an Evan, because an Evan is all hard. But he points out, you said kasha ke'evan, and he said kasha ke'sela. Well, which is it? You're contradicting yourself, because an Evan is a rock that's all hard, while a sela is a rock that's on top of water, right? Because what did Moshe Rabbeinu, what was he supposed to talk to, and what did he end up hitting? A sela. A sela is a rock on top of water, and that's where the water came from. So it says, the Maharshal says, I don't know what you're all over the place. What are you talking about? It's just a side comment the Rama said. So how did the Rama respond to this? It's like nitpicking. So the Rama responded, number one, with great praise. He started out the tshuva that he wrote back with great praise, talking about how the Maharshal was truly a Gadol Hador, unique. We still say the name Maharshal nowadays. We don't say the name of every Rabbi Harry and Rabbi Joe from those times. Maharshal was unique in his generation. And the Rama acknowledged that. He also acknowledged he was older and deserved respect for multiple reasons. But he held his ground. He said, I think you're reading tinra wrong. I think tinra is actually hard as a rock. What's the difference between the other kind of blister and this kind of blister? The other one is soft, and this one is hard as a rock. And it has liquid inside. Blisters grow around liquids. He says, but we know from Aristotle that liquids turn into solids. For example, metals start out as a liquid and turn into metal. So it can't be. It can't be that it's hard as a rock. And Evan and Sela, he says, I agree. Evan and Sela are different. I was just using an analogy, just throwing out terminology. Why are you getting being such a stickler? But if you're going to be a stickler, it's the other way around. Sela is the hardest kind of rock, while an Evan is on top of water. So if Moshe Rabbeinu had to talk to an Evan and water came out, that wouldn't have been such a miracle. There's water there. Sela, that's why it was such a miracle, because there's no water there. It's hard as the hardest kind of rock that there is. So he stood his ground, respectfully argued back, and what happened? The Maharshal seemed to appreciate that. He replied almost with a smile, like he enjoyed the give and take. That's what he wanted. He didn't want to be ignored. He didn't want to be told, I agree with you, you're the Gadol Hador. He wanted to have the give and take, and the Maharshal gives back as well. And it's really a fantastic give and take, but the Maharshal, so he said, he got very upset about one thing. You're quoting Aristotle to me? Aristotle? For us also to learn philosophy. What are you doing? What are you wasting your time on that? We have Chuvas. The Rivash says it's also to learn philosophy. What is this? Better you should spend your time on, the Marshal says, better you should spend your time learning Diktuk. Because I saw in your letter, you made some grammatical errors. Yeah, some of the nouns were feminine and the verbs were masculine and vice versa. Sometimes you start with a second person and you turn it to the third person, right? The second person is talking to you, third person is about him. And vice versa, I'm sorry. And he says, and he points out in your letter, you spelled Meshulam with a Vav, Mole. But all Tanakh Meshulam is spelled Chaser. What are you doing? I don't understand what you're doing. Why don't you learn, spend your time on Diktuk? So, okay. So, on the one hand, he was very serious about everything that Marshall is saying, but on the other hand, it seems like he was writing this with a smile, like he's enjoying the give and take. And the Rama gives it just as takes, but he also gives as well. So the Rama points out, first of all, yes, the Rivash and others say it's usher to learn philosophy, but the Rashba and his Chuvas are very clear. The Rashba lived during the second Maimonidean controversy, where there was an attempt to put a cherem on the Rambam's writings, and the Chachamim from Provence defended philosophy and defended the Rambam, and the Rashba concluded with a cherem, if you're over the age of 25, you're allowed to learn philosophy, but not younger than that. So the Rama says, look, I'm older than 25. I already know Shas and Poskim, so I'm allowed to learn it. Plus, even those who forbid philosophy will allow it. Why? Because I only learn philosophy that the Rambam quoted. I don't learn the Rambam's books. I don't learn Aristotle's books. I learn the Rambam and the Kedas Yitzchak. And so all of his philosophy comes from kosher sources. I remember in yeshiva, I don't know if my Rebbe did this consistently after I left, but when I was there, anytime he quoted a secular philosopher, we checked and we realized he only quoted secular philosophers that Rav Soloveitchik had quoted. He never quoted anything else. Maybe that was just an aberration. I can't say it's been 25 years since I've been in yeshiva, but that's what I remember. So and that's what the Rama is saying. And then he said, so the Maharshal, again, he likes to go into the details, and he said, someone's not here who would have appreciated this. So a mashal and a nimshal. What's a mashal? A mashal is a parable, and a nimshal is what it refers to, the actual truth. So the mashal could be a king who wants to marry off his own daughter and sends his son far away, whatever. And the nimshal is Klal Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chomer and Surah are medieval philosophical terms. Chomer is the substance, and Surah is what it's made into, the format. So the Maharshal says a mashal, it tossed away line, the Maharshal says a mashal is a Surah, and a nimshal is Chomer. So for example, if you have clay is Chomer. It's substance that you make things out of. It's facts. It's the nimshal. It's the reality. And what you make it into is a pot. So it's clay, and the way you present it is the pot. And so how do you present it? That's the mashal, that's a parable. So the surah, the pot, is the mashal, while the chomer, the clay, is the nimshal. It's the actual facts. That's how the Maharshal seems to say it. So the Rama decided to nitpick back at the Maharshal, and he says, no, it's the other way around. The mashal is the chomer, and the nimshal is the surah. So the way I would explain it, for example, think of a Magen David. Magen David is something you want to show to people. It gives a message. So Magen David, that's a fact, that's something you're trying to convey, so that's the nimshal. But really, it's the surah, it's just the shape. Is it made of metal? Is it made of wood? What's it made of? So the substance, that's the mashal, and that's the chomer. While the nimshal, what it really is, what you're trying to explain, is the Magen David. So which one is it? I have no idea who's right, the Maharshal or the Rama. The Maharshal fights back, and the Rama replies, look, I'd extend this conversation further, but then I'd have to quote to you some philosophy. And I know you don't want that, so we'll end the conversation here. And when it comes so the Rama also said, I only learn philosophy. When do I learn philosophy? On Shabbos, Yom Tov, and Chol HaMoed. Right? I would have thought it's the other way around. Learn it during the week, but Shabbos, Yom Tov, Chol HaMoed, that's when you only learn Torah. So he says, I only learn at Shabbos, Yom Tov, and Chol HaMoed when everyone else is going for a spatzir. They're going for a walk. They're going for a tiyul. That's when I learn. So I don't actually lose anything from the time of my learning because everyone else of my caliber is walking around enjoying, getting a little health or walking with their wives or something. So he doesn't lose anything from his learning by the learning philosophy. And on grammar, he says, you're right, I could in fact improve my grammar. I'm not such an expert on it, but I should point out, and he says this respectfully, the scribe who copied over your letter made some grammatical errors, which he points out. So he's respectfully, he doesn't say that Maharshal made errors. The scribe who copied it over made some grammatical errors as well. So it's a little comical, but you see this exchange between, on the one hand, this Gadol Hador, who's as if he's trying to put his arm around this young up-and-comer, saying, let me teach you some things. And the young and up-and-comer rabbi is respectfully pushing back, and that's exactly what the Maharshal wanted. He didn't want a carbon copy of himself. He wanted someone who could hold his own. It's like a geschmack conversation between the two. Fascinating. So that's not the only time the Ramah faced a challenge from some of his colleagues. The Ramah, became the rabbi of Krakow at a very, very young age, 20, and he died at the age of 42, also fairly young. So here's a Maisa Shahaya in Krakow. A man lost his wife, happens, unfortunately. He raised the daughter on his own. He made a shidduch for the daughter, promised a large dowry, and then between the engagement and the wedding, he passed away as well. The daughter is left without either of her parents. Her uncle, her family takes her in, gets her ready for the wedding, but they don't have enough money for the dowry. So comes the day of the wedding, Friday. So why would someone make a wedding on Friday? Because the Seudah will be Seudah Shabbos. So you don't have to spend a lot of money on Shabbos and on the wedding. You merge them together, and then after get married on Friday afternoon, you daven, and then everybody celebrates the wedding at Kiddush and the Seudah. So you save a little money. And she was poor. She was an orphan. So daven mincha, then they all gather together for the wedding, and they don't have enough money for the dowry. And the chassan says, I'm not getting married till I get my dowry. Because how am I supposed to start a home? How am I supposed to furnish the home and put food on the table without the dowry? So the rabbis start going around to all the family members, all the cousins, anybody trying to get a little promise some money so they could get enough to give the dowry. And they're also simultaneously talking to the groom and his father and his family, trying to convince him, just get married, don't worry about it, we'll take care of you, we'll figure it out. Because what happens if she doesn't get married? This is an orphan who's going to be publicly embarrassed in front of the whole community. The chances of her finding another shidduch are very low. This was her last chance, pretty much. It was desperate. Everyone was gathered, and the Ramah did not allow Krakow, or at least that part of Krakow, to daven Kabbalah Shabbos until they conducted the wedding. He said, nothing's happening until we figure this out. 2 hours into Shabbos, they managed to get the chassan to agree. They got enough promises for money and enough compromises from the groom's side that they conducted the wedding. Then the Rama was a Masada Kiddushin himself, personally. The rabbi at Krakow was a Masada Kiddushin. They had full Sheva Brachos, meaning it was a Kiddushin and the Nisuin, and the whole thing. Then they davened. Then they made Kiddush and they had the Suda and they celebrated the wedding. The Rama elsewhere, it says it's mutter for Simchas Chassan Vekala to have a non-Jew play music at a wedding. And probably that's what they did. They had a non-Jew play the fiddle or something, and so they could celebrate the wedding. So the Tzorach Mitzvah. Yeah, the Rama. It's not the Shulchan Aruch. The Rama himself brings it in Shulchan Aruch. And that's something the Reform quoted to permit playing have a non-Jew play an organ in a shul on Shabbos. They say, oh, it's different. And you know what happens once? Very quickly they had a Jew playing an organ. So that's why the rabbi, one of the reasons the rabbis were opposed. But be that as it may, in this time, in the 1550s or whenever it was, they celebrated the wedding on Shabbos.
You can get married on Shabbos?
Oh, so in the next few minutes we'll discuss that. So afterwards, the other rabbis in Krakow, it was a big city, the Dayanim, were very upset that the Rama did this. And the Rama said, what am I supposed to do? So they made a takana after that, because of the Rama, they made a takana, no more weddings on Friday. That way they avoid the problem entirely. That's one way to do it. So let's talk about Avshalom's question. So the Mishnah in Beitza, Lamed Vav Beis, says a wedding is also on Shabbos and Yontif. And among the list of things that are divrei reshus, that are technically permissible but are asur on Shabbos and Yontif, is a wedding. So the Gemara asks, why is it a divrei reshus? It's a mitzvah. So answers the Gemara, that's the Mishnah is only talking about if you already have kids, it's your second marriage, then it's a reshus, and that's why it's in the list. But if you haven't fulfilled pru or vu, you don't have any kids yet, so then it's a mitzvah. So what does that mean? So it's a machlok between Rashi and Tosas. Rashi says that means it's also also to do it even if the first wedding is just shouldn't be listed as reshus. Still also on Shabbos and Yontif. But Rabbeinu Tam says no. The Gemara is telling us that a first marriage is allowed on Shabbos and Yontif, Dvar Mitzvah. And if it's for Dvar Mitzvah, you're allowed to do it on Shabbos and Yontif. Rabbeinu Tam was not so sure, but he wasn't willing to permit it Lamaisa, except B'Shas Adchak. If it's an extenuating circumstance, then he would permit it. Otherwise, he would not. So says the Ramah, this is a Shas Adchak. The girl would not have been able to get married otherwise, probably. It would have been a great coveted brius. It would have been a big embarrassment to her. So there's a Yerushalmi on that Mishnah, Beis Parakeh Halachah Beis. So it says getting married is kikona kinyan b'Shabbos. It's like you're acquiring something on Shabbos. There's a myth that when a man gets married, he acquires his wife and owns her. It's not true. It's kona kinyan. It's like kona kinyan because generally speaking, a man, anything that a woman finds belongs to her husband, unless they make an agreement to the contrary. And he also inherits if she passes away. So therefore, there's an aspect of kinyan, of future things that he could be kona. So it's like kona kinyan. Therefore, according to this Yerushalmi, it would seem every wedding, both first marriage and second marriage and so on, should be forbidden on Shabbos. So therefore, the Smag says the machlok is between the Bavli and Yerushalmi, and we pass on like the Bavli, and therefore, at least according to Rabbeinu Tam, a first marriage should be allowed on Shabbos. The Smak has an interesting argument. The Smak, he says that Erusin, Kiddushin, giving the ring, is allowed, but not Nisuin. What's his proof? So Gemara in Yoma about the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. So Kohen Gadol has to have one wife on Yom Kippur. So what if his wife dies? What's Klal Yisrael supposed to do? He can't do the avodah on Yom Kippur. He can't go into the Kodesh Kodashim. So the Gemara says before Yontif, he is Mekadesh and Isha al Tanai. He marries a woman on condition that if his first wife dies, the second woman becomes his wife. Otherwise, she's not his wife. So says the Smak, well, why do they have to do that? He should just marry her on Yontif. If you're allowed to get married, the Tzorech Mitzvah on Shabbos and Yontiv, you should just marry her. Ella, what? You're not allowed to get married on Yontiv. You're not allowed to get married on Shabbos and Yontiv. You're only allowed to do the Kiddushin, but you're not allowed to do the Nisuin, which is what's required for this. So the Rama doesn't like this argument. He argues against the Smak in his tshuva on the subject, because he says, okay, good, the Avodah on Yom Kippur is a mitzvah, but maybe Pru'urvu is a greater mitzvah. So you can't get married for the Avodah on Yom Kippur. But maybe for a greater mitzvah, like Pru'urvu, like having kids, to be fruitful and multiply, maybe that itself overrides Yom Kippur. And he says maybe for the Avodah on Yom Kippur, it requires also to consummate it, to have to be a Rishona. And that's not allowed on Yom Kippur at all. So therefore, Yom Kippur could be different. But otherwise, you could do Kiddushin, you could do Nisuin, but maybe you can't consummate the marriage on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So the Gemara Ksubis, which asks, so why are you allowed to do Bia Rishona, or are you allowed to do Bia Rishona on Shabbos? Because it's blood, seems like some sort of Chabala, you're injuring the woman. So the Gemara has many different sides to the argument about why it can be mutter. Maybe the flowing blood is pooled blood. Maybe it's davar she'eino miskaven, something you don't intend. Maybe it's a different sorach, davar she'eino miskaven. Maybe makalkel. So the conclusion is a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. One says it's asar, one says it's mutter. Who says what? So the Gemara says in the place where Rav lived, they said Rav holds it's mutter. And the place where Shmuel lived, they said Shmuel holds it's mutter. So in the end, everybody holds it's mutter. So Bia Rishona should be allowed on Shabbos. So Rama said, therefore, Shasat Chak, you're allowed to get married on Shabbos. The Bach, who lived, they overlapped a little bit, but he was 40 years younger than the Rama, or 30 years younger than the Rama. So the Bach had, Amir Hashem will talk about this in the future, but we think of these people as these great, overwhelming names. The Bach had sorrows from his Baal Koreh. Call him the Chazan. I don't know if he was actually the Chazan. I know he was a Baal Koreh. And he made trouble with him. So one of the things he said, he complained to other rabbis of other communities that the Bach performed a wedding on Shabbos. And the Bach said, it's almost the exact same Maisa as the Ramah. She was an orphan. The food was already prepared. They couldn't settle the dowry. Shasad Chak, covered a brius. Ramah says it's mutter, so I followed the Ramah. So it's interesting, almost the exact same. They didn't have the takana of Krakow where the Bach lived. I found a fascinating tshuva of the Maharam Lublin. Maharam Lublin lived also overlapped. He was born in 1558, so they overlapped. So he was asked the following shaila: can a kala go to the mikveh Friday night after Shabbos if she's getting married Friday night? So what's the assumption of the shaila? That she's getting married Friday night.
When is she going to the mikveh?
After Shabbos already. Meaning once Shabbos. So the Maharam Lublin says, look, a kala is allowed to go to the mikveh during the day. Not like a married woman. A kala is allowed to go during the day. So go during the day. But if, for whatever reason, that wasn't possible, he said, the tzarech mitzvah, you're allowed to go to the mikveh even after Shabbos begins if she's getting married that night. So obviously she's getting married that night. So he also says, but the minhag in Lublin was they didn't do Bia Rishona on Shabbos. So why should she have to go to the mikveh then? Maybe she shouldn't have to go to the mikveh. It's not tzarech mitzvah.
You can't touch it.
So then Maharam Lublin says there's more to Simchas Chasim Nekala than just that. It's actually a very important lesson. So maybe they're Hasidish and they had to walk down the chuppah holding together. But whatever it was, a Simcha dance. I don't know. But he says that alone is considered tzarech mitzvah and therefore she can go. So we know in the Ramah and the Bach's communities they allowed getting married on Shabbos b'shas adchak. The Maharam Lublin seems to allow it even if it's not b'shas adchak. I don't know. The Shach quotes this Maharam Lublin in Hilchos Nida, not regarding Shabbos and getting married. So it seems like it's quoted la halacha, but I don't know how to tie it together with its shas adchak context. But maybe he's also talking shas adchak. I don't know. So we're out of time. Thank you very much. Have a good night.